Hello and welcome. I'm Trisha, your host and general purveyor of crazy ideas. I have always been fascinated by history, the actual everyday lives that our ancestors lived. And I love exploring living history museums and going on house tours that really give me those personal insights into what their lives were really like. You know, what they wore, what they ate, the work they did, how they spent their time. But I had a problem. I would get into history class at school, and it was like a whole different thing. It was just a bunch of interchangeable kings fighting these basically identical wars. And to be honest, I was bored to tears. There didn't seem to be much of a connection between the personal stories I'd listened to from reenactors and these dry facts in my textbooks and history classes. So, over the years, I've played with this idea of seeing if I could figure out what a day in the life of just an ordinary woman might have been like during these various times throughout history. And maybe even going so far as to recreate it. But between kids and work and just life, I've never really had the ability to give it a go. So now, here we are. It's the last couple of months of 2020. And between the ongoing pandemic restrictions and the fact that my kids aren't little anymore, they're teenagers, and so this project has sort of bubbled back up to the surface. And I thought that I would both document my experiments and invite you along on this crazy time travel experimental anthropological adventure. It should be fun. So I'm beginning in the late 1820s in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. So why that particular time and place? Over at Foundations Revealed, the lovely Kathy Hay and her team hold an annual costuming competition. And this year's theme is Once Upon a Time. For me, it could not be more perfect. One of my degrees is in creative writing, and I've been a professional writer since the early 2000s. Stories are what drew me into history in the first place. It's what I love. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to interpret a piece of literature in a garment, first I'm going to have to choose something that really, really resonates. And so I pulled out my beloved coffee-stained Norton's Anthology from college, and I settled on a rather obscure poem by Edgar Allan Poe. And I've always really resonated with Poe's sense of being outside of ordinary society and being out of sync with everyone else. And so I decided that trying to interpret that sense in a gown would be a really fun challenge. So this poem that I've chosen was untitled and unpublished in Poe's lifetime. And what I find really interesting is that he didn't write it for publication. He wrote it for a friend, Lucy Balderston. And so Lucy was very active in Baltimore literary circles, and she often held gatherings with local writers in her parlor. At these gatherings, she would pass around her commonplace book or her journal so that her literary friends could add little poems or short stories or whatever. And it was sort of the Romantic era's version of passing around your yearbook at high school so that your friends can sign it. And so what I find really interesting is that most of the entries in her book were a little bit flirtatious, as you might expect from young men writing in the book for a young lady. Poe's contribution, though, is different. It is deeply soul-searching and autobiographical, and I'd like to share it with you. So, Poe wrote, "From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source, I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone, and all I loved alone. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky that as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view." So much imagery, so much depth there. And we can spend hours unpacking all of that symbolism, but it's not what you would expect a young man to write to a pretty young lady. And yet, here we are. Since this will be my first attempt at historical reproduction, I am literally starting from scratch with the foundational undergarments. First up is the corded petticoat, which I am basing primarily on a tutorial from Abby Cox at American Duchess, which I will link below. And I'm also referencing a tutorial for a tucked petticoat from Foundations Revealed. I will also be creating a chemise, bustle, sleeve poofs, and a pair of 1830s stays based on this pattern from Red Threaded, and of course there's the actual gown, which will be based on truly Victorians, 1830s romantic era dresses. So we'll see how that goes. And while I am doing a lot of sewing here, I'm also going to be showing you some period cooking, and a few other things will be sprinkled in here as well. So I hope you will join me on this deep dive into the everyday lives of the women who came before us and whose lives directly led to the lives that we lead today. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a little nuts, but I hope you'll join me. See you soon.